The corridors of Seattle General Hospital were quiet that night, the kind of stillness that pressed down on the shoulders of those who walked them. Rain tapped steadily against the wide windows of the cardiac ward, the sound a muted metronome for the machines humming inside. Sophia Carter adjusted the strap of her mask and moved toward the room at the end of the hall, scanning the nameplate as she did. Her breath caught when she read it. Margaret Carter. It had been years since she'd spoken that name aloud. The woman inside the room was not just another patient. She was her former mother-in-law. Once, Margaret had been a figure of power, unyielding, domineering, with words sharp enough to cut through bone. To Sophia, she had been nothing short of an adversary, someone who made her feel like an intruder in her own marriage. And now, fate had placed them here, in this sterile room filled with the antiseptic tang of disinfectant and the faint, mechanical rhythm of a heart monitor. Sophia paused at the door, forcing her hands to stay steady. She was a nurse. She was here to do her job. Whatever history they shared, whatever scars still ached beneath the surface, she would set them aside. Slowly, she pushed the door open. Margaret lay in the bed, her once imposing figure reduced to fragile lines beneath hospital sheets. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her chest rose and fell in shallow motions. A mask fed her oxygen, though it seemed to do little against the weakness that clung to her body. When Margaret's eyes opened and landed on Sophia, something unexpected flickered there. Not disdain, not the cold superiority Sophia remembered so well, but something softer, fear, perhaps, or resignation. The older woman's lips trembled, her hand twitching against the blanket as though reaching for something unseen. Sophia! The name came out hoarse, broken, almost reverent. The sound sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. Never, not once during the years of her marriage, had Margaret spoken her name like that. She had called her many things, most of them cruel, dismissive. But never Sophia, never with that fragile tenderness. "You should rest," Sophia said quietly, keeping her voice professional. "Don't strain yourself." But Margaret shook her head weakly, her breathing labored. "No, I have to tell you. There's something you must know. I can't leave this world without saying it." Sophia's heart clenched. She wanted to dismiss it, to believe that the woman was simply delirious, lost in the haze of medication and the looming shadow of mortality. But there was something urgent in Margaret's tone, something that clawed its way past the years of bitterness and demanded attention. Margaret's hand lifted shakily, reaching toward her. For a moment, Sophia hesitated, then stepped forward and wrapped her own fingers around the frail, papery skin. The grip was surprisingly strong, as though the older woman was anchoring herself to life by clinging to Sophia's hand. "I was wrong," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. "I was wrong about so many things about you." The words struck Sophia harder than she expected. A rush of memories, Margaret's disdainful glances, her biting remarks, the endless ways she'd made her feel unwanted, collided with the vulnerability of the moment. It was disorienting to see her reduced to this fragile state, confessing regrets like a penitent soul before the final judgment. "You don't have to do this," Sophia murmured, though her throat was tight. "Yes, I do." Margaret's eyes glistened. "You deserve the truth, even if you hate me for it, even if it destroys you." Sophia's pulse quickened. What truth? The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily, but each sound felt heavier now, as though counting down to something inevitable. Margaret's chest rose with effort, and she let out a breath that rattled in her lungs. "It wasn't the doctors who decided that surgery," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't because of medical need." Sophia froze, her breath caught in her chest. She had lived with that scar, both on her body and her soul, believing it had been necessary, believing that fate had been cruel but unavoidable. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's gaze locked onto hers, unwavering despite the weakness pulling at her. The chart was altered. the decision forced. You weren't meant to be cut open that night. It was done for reasons that had nothing to do with your health or your child's. The room seemed to shrink around Sophia, the walls closing in as the words sank into her. Her stomach twisted, her mind racing back to that night, to the confusion, the helplessness, the sudden announcement that her child hadn't survived. Margaret's grip on her hand tightened. "There's more," she said, her voice growing urgent, desperate. "But you have to promise you'll listen. You'll hear it all." Sophia could only stare at her, her body trembling, the air heavy with the weight of what was about to come. The heart monitor beeped again, steady and relentless. Margaret drew in a ragged breath, and then, with eyes wide and wet, she prepared to reveal the secret that had haunted them both for years. The silence in the room thickened until Sophia thought she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. Margaret's words still hung in the air, unshakable, undeniable. Her mind recoiled, refusing to believe them, yet her heart hammered with the terrifying certainty that they were true. "You need to understand," Margaret whispered, forcing each syllable past her failing breath. "Your daughter, she didn't die." The world seemed to tilt. Sophia's knees weakened, and for a moment she thought she might collapse to the cold linoleum floor. Every nerve in her body screamed against the words. They couldn't be real. They couldn't undo years of grief. "I held her," Sophia stammered, her voice breaking. "They told me she was gone before I even woke up. They said she never drew a breath." "Tilit." Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears. "I lied." The words crashed down like a blow. Sophia stumbled back a step, shaking her head violently. "No, no, don't do this. Don't you dare tell me this now." Margaret coughed, her frail body convulsing against the sheets. "It was David. He didn't want children. He wasn't ready. He said a baby would ruin everything. His future, his career, his freedom. He came to me, begged me to make it disappear. I should have said no. I should have fought him. But I didn't. I used my position. I made sure the doctors believed the child was lost. We switched her with another baby who hadn't survived." Sophia pressed her hands to her temples as if she could block out the sound. The room spun. Images she had buried for years clawed their way back into her mind. The blinding lights of the operating room, the weightless emptiness in her arms when she awoke, the unbearable ache that never left her chest. "You stole her from me," she whispered, her voice raw, hollow. Margaret's hand trembled as she reached for Sophia again. I thought I was helping my son. I thought if you believed the child was gone, you would leave quietly and he could build his life without being chained down. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Sophia's tears burned hot trails down her face. Rage and grief warred inside her chest, leaving her breathless. For years, she had lived with the crushing guilt of failure, believing she hadn't protected her child. That grief had destroyed her marriage, shattered her trust, and carved a hole in her soul that nothing could fill. And now she learned it had been a lie, a theft so cruel it defied comprehension. Where? The word was ripped from her throat, more demand than question. Margaret hesitated, shame twisting her features. "There's a notebook," she whispered. "Top drawer by the bed. First page. An address. She was given to a family, wealthy, respectable. They raised her as their own." Sophia lunged for the drawer, her hand shaking as she yanked it open. The small leather notebook slid into her palm, its pages worn from years of use. She tore the first one free, her eyes locking on the scrawled address. Bellevue, a mansion tucked away in one of Seattle's most exclusive neighborhoods. Her breath hitched. So close after all this time. Margaret's voice broke again. "He's powerful, influential. He won't let her go easily. You'll never win against him." Sophia turned, the slip of paper clutched so tightly it crumpled in her fist. Her tears had dried, replaced by something sharper. something that burned with fury and desperate resolve. "You don't get to tell me what I can or can't do," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You don't get to take her from me twice." Margaret sagged against the pillows, her eyes closing as if the confession had drained the last of her strength. "I'm sorry, Sophia. God forgive me. I don't know if you ever will." But Sophia was no longer listening. She couldn't. Her heart pounded with a single thought, a singular purpose: to see her child. She shoved the notebook into her bag and stumbled out of the room, her steps quickening as the fluorescent lights blurred overhead. Nurses glanced up as she passed, but no one stopped her. The hospital's glass doors slid open with a hiss, and the cold night air rushed in, mingling with the smell of rain. Seattle's streets glistened under the downpour, neon signs reflecting in puddles. Sophia slid into her car, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. She glanced once more at the address, blurred by her tears, then shoved it onto the passenger seat. The engine roared to life. For years, she had lived with the agony of loss. Tonight, for the first time, there was something else, hope, raw and dangerous, thrumming through her veins. And so, in the heart of a rain-soaked city, Sophia drove into the night, determined to find the daughter who had never truly been lost. The drive across the I-90 bridge was a blur of rain and headlights. Sophia's eyes burned from exhaustion, but adrenaline kept her foot pressed firmly to the gas. The wipers beat back the storm in frantic strokes, revealing fleeting glimpses of Mercer Island's quiet streets. Mansions lined the waterfront, their windows glowing like lanterns against the black sky. Each passing house twisted her gut tighter. Somewhere behind those walls was a child with her blood, her smile, her laugh. When she pulled into the cul-de-sac, the GPS announced the address in a flat voice, as though this were just another delivery, another errand. But Sophia knew better. The estate rose before her, a towering structure of glass and stone, trimmed in ivy and framed by iron gates. Its immaculate lawn gleamed even in the downpour. She sat motionless for a moment, her breath shallow, the paper with the address crumpled in her fist. From the side of the house, faint and clear even over the patter of rain, came a child's voice, a song simple, off-key but pure. Sophia's heart lurched violently against her ribs. She didn't need to see the child. She knew. Mothers always know. She pressed a trembling hand to the gate intercom, unsure of what she would say. Before she could form a thought, a sensor clicked and the gates swung inward with silent efficiency. Her pulse thundered as she walked up the long path, each step heavier than the last. The front door opened before she reached it. Standing there was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair slicked back from the rain. His expression was wary but polite, his hand braced on the frame as though ready to close it at any moment. "Can I help you?" His voice carried the clipped courtesy of someone used to handling strangers. Sophia swallowed hard. Words tangled in her throat, but she forced them out. I need to see James Whitman." "I'm James." His eyes flickered over her, taking in the soaked jacket, the drawn face, the way she clutched a slip of paper as though it were lifeline. "If you're here about the nanny position, you should have scheduled through the agency." She blinked, the words barely registered. "Nanny position?" He frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "Yes, we posted an opening last week." "Are you not? I'm not here for a job." Her voice cracked, but she steadied it with sheer will. "I'm here for my daughter." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Rain pounded on the roof. Thunder rolled across the sound, but in the foyer everything was frozen. James's face went pale, his jaw clenched, and the easy civility in his voice vanished. "What did you just say?" "My daughter," Sophia repeated, each word trembling with desperation. "The little girl in this house, she's mine. She was stolen from me the night she was born." James's entire frame stiffened. His hand gripped the door tighter, the muscles in his jaw shifting as if he were holding back a surge of anger. "This is insane. I don't know who you are, but if you think you can come here in the middle of the night and I'm telling the truth," she cut in, her voice sharp, pleading. "They told me my baby died during delivery, but she didn't. She was taken, and she's here. She's here with you." For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe recognition, but it vanished behind a hardened stare. "You need to leave. Now, before I call security." Sophia's throat closed, panic rising like floodwater. She could hear the child's voice again, lilting faintly from somewhere deeper inside the house. It ripped at her, urged her forward. "I'm not here to take her from you," she whispered, her tears hot and relentless. "I just need you to listen. Please, just listen." James hesitated, torn between slamming the door and the unmistakable anguish in the woman's face. Something in her eyes, something raw and broken, made him pause. His voice was low, strained. "If you're lying, if this is some twisted scheme, I'm not," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I'll explain everything. I'll show you proof. But don't shut me out. Not tonight." For a long moment, only the storm answered. Finally, James stepped back, his expression tight, conflicted. "Come inside," he said, his voice clipped. "I'll hear what you have to say. But understand, if you're here to threaten the only family I have left, I won't hesitate to end this conversation." Sophia nodded, her chest heaving, relief flooding through her despite the tension. She crossed the threshold, dripping rain onto the polished hardwood, and the door shut heavily behind her. Inside, warmth radiated from the lights, from the faint scent of lavender and polished wood. Somewhere down the hall, the soft melody of a child's song continued, pulling at Sophia's soul. For the first time in years, she was close, so painfully close, to the daughter she had lost. The foyer was warm, but the tension inside it chilled Sophia to the bone. James Whitman led her down a wide hallway, his shoulders rigid, every movement deliberate. He stopped in the kitchen, a polished space of marble counters and chrome fixtures. He gestured for her to sit at the table. She obeyed, though her legs trembled so violently she had to grip the chair to steady herself. James poured 2 cups of tea, his expression unreadable as steam curled between them. He set 1 cup in front of her, but didn't sit right away. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying her like she was both an intruder and a mystery he hadn't yet solved. "You claim the little girl here is yours," he said finally. His voice was calm, but beneath it ran a current of steel. "Before you spin another word, you need to hear my side." Sophia nodded quickly, her throat dry. James exhaled, the sound heavy with memory. "My wife and I tried for years. We went to specialists, clinics, spent every penny we had on treatments. Nothing worked. The doctors told us the truth eventually. She would never carry a child." His jaw tightened. It broke her, and it nearly broke us. He moved toward the table, finally sitting opposite her. His hands cradled his cup, though he didn't drink. His gaze softened slightly as he spoke again. Then, one night, the hospital called. They said a newborn had been abandoned. Healthy. No family willing to claim her. They asked if we'd consider adoption. We didn't hesitate. We thought it was a miracle, an answer to all those prayers we thought went unheard. Sophia's heart clenched. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, forcing herself not to speak. Not yet. James's eyes grew distant, fixed on a memory only he could see. From the moment we brought her home, the house changed. Laughter, late-night cries, bottles at 3 a.m. I'd never known chaos could feel like joy. My wife glowed in a way I hadn't seen in years. For the first time, she felt whole. His voice faltered, and then, 3 years later, she was gone. A heart attack. Sudden. I was left with a toddler who kept asking when Mommy would come back from heaven. The words cracked the air like a whip. Sophia bit the inside of her cheek, her vision blurring. She wanted to scream, to demand her daughter back that very second. But she forced herself to stay still. James set his cup down, his gaze steady once more. That little girl is everything I have. She's my world. If you think I'll just hand her over to a stranger who shows up in the rain with a story about stolen babies, you're mistaken. Sophia's breath came quick, her chest burning with grief and rage. She turned her head slightly, and that's when she saw it. Through a pane of frosted glass leading to the family room, a small figure darting past. Light brown hair pulled into a loose braid, humming to herself as she carried a doll in her arms. Her heart stopped. Every instinct screamed at her to rise, to burst into that room, to gather the child into her arms and never let go. But she gripped the chair tighter, nails digging into the wood. She couldn't terrify the girl, couldn't let this moment unravel into chaos. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I don't want to rip her away from you," she whispered. "I know what she means to you, but she's mine, James. She was stolen from me, and if you won't believe me now, then let me prove it. Let me stay close enough to care for her, to show you who I am. Please, let me be her nanny." The words hung in the kitchen, heavy and fragile all at once. James's face betrayed nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. For the first time that night, he seemed uncertain, caught between his fear of losing everything and the raw desperation of the woman across from him. James sat in silence for a long moment, his fingers pressed against the rim of his teacup. The rain outside had softened to a steady drizzle, but inside the kitchen the tension only thickened. He studied Sophia with a gaze that seemed to weigh every breath she took. "If what you're saying is true," he began carefully, "then you're not just some woman off the street. But if it isn't, if this is some scheme, then you're dangerous to my daughter." Sophia shook her head quickly, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm not here to hurt her. I swear it. I just need to be near her. I need a chance to prove it." James leaned back, his jaw tightening. "Then you'll agree to conditions. Strict ones." She nodded without hesitation. "Anything." He straightened in his chair, his voice gaining the sharp edge of a man used to making binding decisions. "First, a DNA test. If you're who you claim to be, the results will confirm it. I won't rely on stories or emotions. I need science, fact, documentation." Sophia's breath caught, but she nodded again. "Fine, whatever it takes." "Second," James continued, "a psychological evaluation. If you're going to be anywhere near her, I need to know you can control yourself, that you won't break down in front of her, won't confuse her with your emotions. You'll see a professional and follow through with their recommendations." Sophia swallowed hard, her stomach twisting. The idea of sitting in a sterile office, recounting her trauma to a stranger, felt unbearable. But one thought drowned the discomfort. Her daughter's face so close now within reach. "I'll do it," she whispered. James's eyes narrowed, measuring her resolve. "And finally a contract, a non-disclosure agreement. You will not tell her who you are, not until I decide she's ready. If you say a single word to her before that, this arrangement ends immediately. Do you understand me?" Sophia's chest tightened. The demand was cruel, yet logical. Revealing the truth, without preparation, could shatter the child's world. Slowly, she lowered her gaze and whispered, "I understand." "Good." James exhaled, his shoulders dropping slightly as though a verdict had been passed. "If you agree to those terms, I'll give you a trial run. Part-time at first. You'll help with the house, spend time with her, but always under my supervision. If she warms to you, we'll expand from there." Sophia closed her eyes, tears slipping free. It wasn't the reunion she dreamed of. She couldn't rush into the room, scoop her daughter into her arms, and claim the years stolen from them. But it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative beginning. "I'll sign whatever you want," she said. The next week was a blur of appointments and paperwork. The DNA swab was quick, sterile, over in seconds, but Sophia's heart pounded for days afterward, waiting for confirmation of what she already knew. The psychological evaluation was harder. She sat in a softly lit office, her hands twisting in her lap as she spoke of loss, of betrayal, of the faint thread of hope pulling her forward. The therapist nodded, scribbling notes, before finally saying she was stable enough for caregiving. When James handed her the NDA, the document thick with legal language, she didn't bother reading it. She simply signed where he pointed, her hand trembling but determined. And so, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, Sophia Carter returned to the Whitman house, not as a mother reclaiming her child, but as a nanny hired to care for another man's daughter. James introduced her to Sophie as Miss Sophia, a kind woman who would help around the house. The little girl blinked up at her with wide, curious eyes. There was no recognition, not consciously, but she smiled shyly and reached for Sophia's hand, and in that instant the ache in Sophia's chest deepened and healed all at once. Her shifts were short at first, 3 afternoons a week. She cooked small meals, folded laundry, read picture books aloud in a careful, steady voice. Each time Sophie laughed, it was like sunlight cutting through fog. Each time she laid her head against Sophia's arm, the temptation to whisper the truth nearly overwhelmed her. But she remembered the contract, the conditions, the fragile trust she was building. Days blurred into weeks. Sophia learned the rhythm of the house, the way Sophie liked her apple slices peeled, the lullabies she hummed to herself before bed, the way James's voice softened when he said good night. Slowly, cautiously, she became part of the fabric of their lives. It wasn't everything. Not yet. But it was more than she had dared to dream just days ago. And it was enough to keep her going. By late spring, the arrangement had already shifted. What began as a few afternoons each week stretched into longer days, evenings that bled into bedtime routines. Sophia slipped into the household with such ease that even James, meticulous and guarded, found himself relying on her more than he'd ever intended. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, James lingered in the kitchen while Sophia wiped down the counters. His voice was low, matter-of-fact, but carried something unspoken. It doesn't make sense for you to keep coming and going. She's attached to you already. Moving you in would provide consistency. Sophia froze, the rag in her hand damp and trembling. Moving in, living under the same roof as her daughter, every morning, every night. She forced her voice steady. Are you sure? It's a big step. James's gaze was even, though softer than she was used to. It's practical, and she'll benefit from it. So will I. A week later, her belongings were neatly tucked into a guest room at the far end of the hall. The house seemed to exhale when she settled in, as though it had been waiting for her all along. She cooked breakfast, brewed coffee, folded laundry with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew the rhythm of care. At night, she read Sophie stories, her voice soothing as the child drifted to sleep with her head resting against Sophia's arm. But the hardest part was the silence, the way Sophia swallowed the word daughter, each time it burned at the edge of her tongue. She wanted nothing more than to call her by her true name, to whisper the truth into her ear as she tucked her in. Instead, she smiled and kept the secret buried, honoring the contract, honoring James's trust. The mansion itself became both sanctuary and torment. In the mornings, sunlight streamed through wide windows, spilling across polished floors where Sophie played with her dolls. Sophia would kneel beside her, listening intently as the little girl invented stories, her laughter filling spaces that had once been hollow. Every sound carved deeper into Sophia's heart. James, too, began to notice. He would pause in the doorway, watching Sophia braid Sophie's hair or guide her small hands across picture books. At first his expression was wary, protective, but as the months passed, that edge softened. He saw how Sophia steadied herself, never breaking down, never crossing the invisible line of disclosure. She was careful, measured, selfless. Sometimes, late in the afternoons, they walked together in the garden. Sophie would skip ahead, chasing butterflies across the lawn, while James and Sophia followed at a slower pace. Conversation came in fragments at first: the weather, chores, the logistics of school drop-offs. But soon the words deepened, slipping into personal territory. He told her about the day his wife died, how helpless he'd felt holding a sobbing child and realizing he had to become both parents overnight. His voice caught when he admitted how often he feared failing. Sophia listened, her own grief resonating like an echo. She shared how the years after her supposed loss had hollowed her out, how every child she passed on the street was a wound that refused to close. Her honesty carried no blame, only the raw weight of memory. In those moments, something shifted. They weren't adversaries bound by contracts and suspicion. They were two people scarred by loss, drawn together by the fragile miracle of a child. The change was subtle at first: a fleeting glance across the dinner table, a lingering pause at the end of a conversation. But Sophia felt it. James's eyes no longer carried only caution. They held curiosity, even admiration. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, James stood in the doorway of the kitchen while Sophia dried the last dish. He didn't speak right away. His gaze lingered, steady, contemplative. Sophia turned, startled by the intensity of his look. "What is it?" she asked softly. He shook his head, almost to himself. "Nothing. Just you're good for her. And for this house." It was the first time his voice carried warmth instead of guarded civility. The words settled over Sophia like a fragile promise, one she dared not trust, but couldn't help hoping might grow into something more. The summer air in Seattle carried the scent of wet earth and blooming hydrangeas. By now, Sophia's days in the Whitman house had settled into a rhythm so natural it was as if she had always belonged there. Every morning, she rose before the sun, preparing Sophie's lunch in a neat little box: apple slices without skins, peanut butter sandwiches cut into triangles, and a note folded small enough to slip under the napkin. When she drove Sophie to school, the little girl chattered from the back seat, her words tumbling over one another, eager to share every thought. Sophia listened with the patience of someone who could never get enough, smiling at each story, memorizing each expression. When she dropped her off at the school gates, Sophie always turned back for a final wave, her braid swinging, her smile bright. Those brief moments carved themselves deep into Sophia's memory, treasures she hoarded silently. In the afternoons, Sophia sat with her at the kitchen table, tracing letters across lined paper. Sophie's small fingers clutched her pencil, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Like this, sweetheart," Sophia said softly, guiding her hand to form the curve of an S. The child's laughter bubbled when she succeeded, and Sophia felt pride swell inside her, mingling with sorrow for the years she had missed. James often stood in the doorway, unseen, watching. He never interrupted, but his eyes followed the way Sophia's patience wrapped around the child like sunlight. Slowly, the suspicion that had once sharpened his gaze gave way to something gentler: respect, gratitude, and something else he didn't dare name. As weeks turned into months, the walls between them continued to thin. Dinner conversations stretched longer, no longer confined to schedules and chores. James spoke of his work, the pressures of managing his business, and the constant weight of responsibility. Sophia shared stories from the hospital, moments of joy and heartbreak she carried home from her patients. She was careful not to burden him with too much, but each word pulled them closer into the same orbit. One night, while Sophie was asleep, James poured them both a glass of wine. They sat on the porch, the rain a faint whisper against the roof. "You've changed this house," he admitted quietly. "It used to feel heavy, empty. Since you came, it doesn't anymore." Sophia looked at him, startled by the vulnerability in his tone. She wanted to tell him why, because she wasn't just a nanny, because the child was her flesh and blood. But the contract's shadow hung heavy, silencing her. So she only said, "I'm glad I can help." Inside his study drawer, locked away, James kept the envelope with the DNA results. He had opened it weeks ago, hands trembling as the truth burned itself onto the page. A perfect match. Sophia was the girl's mother. He hadn't told her he knew. Not yet. He wanted to be sure of her stability, of her intentions, of whether revealing the truth would heal or harm. But every time he saw Sophia brush hair from Sophie's face or kiss her forehead goodnight, his certainty grew. The truth couldn't stay hidden forever. The mansion had become more than just a roof over their heads. It was a home in the making. Sophia filled its quiet corners with warmth, her humming in the kitchen, her laughter with Sophie in the garden, her gentle words echoing up the staircase. James felt the difference every day, though he rarely said it aloud. As autumn approached, Sophie grew restless with excitement over birthdays. She whispered plans to her father in hurried tones, glancing at Sophia to make sure she wasn't listening. James crouched beside her, nodding solemnly as the child's eyes shone with conspiratorial delight. One evening, when Sophia was folding laundry, she overheard them in the next room. Sophie's giggles, James's low murmur. She stepped closer, and the child's voice floated toward her. "We have to make it special, Daddy. She takes care of me all the time. I want her to feel happy like she makes me feel." Sophia's throat tightened. She pressed the towel to her chest, swallowing back tears. She didn't step inside, didn't let them know she'd heard. But in that moment, she understood. Whatever they were planning, it was for her. The air in the house shifted in the days that followed, charged with secret anticipation. Sophia noticed James watching her more often, his gaze softer, lingering. And though she couldn't name the hope blooming inside her, she carried it like a fragile flame. Her birthday was only days away, and without her knowing, James and Sophie were preparing the moment that would change everything. The night of her birthday arrived quietly, without fanfare, without the weight of past celebrations that had often left Sophia feeling hollow. She expected nothing, perhaps a simple greeting from James, a quick hug from Sophie before bedtime. But as she stepped into the dining room that evening, she stopped short. The long table was set not with grandeur, but with warmth. A single cake sat at the center, small and homemade, its frosting uneven, but carefully decorated with strawberries. Balloons floated gently in the corners, and on the sideboard a vase of fresh lilies, her favorite, brightened the room. Sophie stood beside the cake, her hands clasped behind her back, her face glowing with anticipation. James lingered nearby, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "Happy birthday, Miss Sophia!" Sophie shouted, her voice ringing like bells. Sophia pressed a hand to her mouth, overcome. You did this for me?" Sophie nodded furiously, bouncing on her toes. "Daddy helped, but it was my idea. We wanted you to feel special." Her knees weakened. For years, birthdays had been reminders of loss, of the child she believed she'd never hold. And now here she was, standing in a room where her daughter's laughter filled the air. It was almost too much to bear. They lit the candles, and Sophie insisted on singing, her voice sweet and slightly off-key, James joining in with quiet harmony. When Sophia closed her eyes to make a wish, her heart whispered only one. "Let me keep this. Let me keep her." After the cake was cut and shared, Sophie darted away and returned clutching a small box wrapped in shiny paper. She held it out with both hands, her eyes wide and serious. "This is for you," she said. Sophia's fingers shook as she took it. She opened the lid slowly, revealing a delicate silver pendant shaped like a heart. Inside was a tiny engraving, "Forever." Her breath caught. "Sophie, it's beautiful!" The little girl looked down shyly, then raised her eyes with sudden boldness. "Daddy told me the truth," she said softly. "You're my mommy from heaven." The words pierced through Sophia like sunlight breaking storm clouds. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Tears welled and spilled unchecked down her cheeks. She fell to her knees, arms opening wide. Sophie rushed into them, her small body pressing close, her warmth searing into Sophia's soul. "My baby!" Sophia whispered, clutching her daughter as if she might vanish again. "My sweet, sweet girl. I love you so much." Sophie giggled through her own tears. "I love you too, Mommy." James stood a few feet away, his eyes glistening, his arms crossed loosely as though holding himself steady. He had known this moment would come, had prepared himself for it, but nothing could have braced him for the sight of mother and daughter reunited. The contract, the conditions, the walls he'd built, all of it seemed meaningless in the face of such truth. Sophia looked up at him through blurred vision. Gratitude, love, and disbelief swirled in her gaze. He stepped forward, resting a hand gently on Sophie's back, his other hand brushing Sophia's shoulder. The three of them held each other in a circle of quiet reverence. Then Sophie, ever innocent, tilted her head back and looked between them. "Mommy," she said with a mischievous grin, "will you marry Daddy?" Sophia froze, her lips parted, laughter breaking through her tears. James let out a startled breath, then chuckled, shaking his head. "That's not exactly how proposals usually go," he murmured. But Sophia, still cradling her daughter, began to laugh too, a deep, liberating sound that washed away years of sorrow. "Well," she said softly, "how could I possibly say no to the both of you?" Sophie squealed, hugging them tighter, while James's hand lingered on Sophia's, steady and sure. In that instant, words weren't needed. The bond between them had already taken root. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, steady and unending. But inside, the house glowed with warmth. Sophia held her daughter. James held them both. And together they stood in the hush of the night, a new family forged not by contracts or blood alone, but by love and the resilience of truth. For years, Sophia had carried grief like a shadow. Now, in the heart of a rain-soaked Seattle evening, she found something else. Justice that spoke in whispers, not in courts or accusations, but in the quiet return of what was once stolen. And as thunder rolled faintly in the distance, she knew that at last the storm had passed